Which Canadian invention was most significant, the radio or the telephone? Before I tell you why the radio is more significant than the telephone, I will tell you what it is and about its history. The radio is the transmission and reception of electrical signals carrying sound messages, also known as a modern form of communication, news, information, and entertainment. The history of the radio. On December 12, 1901, Guglielmo Marconi, an Italian inventor and engineer, sent the first wireless broadcast through radio from Poole, Cornwall, to about 2,100 miles away. His transmission was of the Morse code letter S. He is considered the inventor of the radio by most people. Marconi had also managed to send a radio transmission in 1896, but it only spanned to 4 kilometers away. Furthermore, Canadian inventor Reginald Fessenden was the first person to send a radio transmission with a human voice on December 24, 1906, in Brant Rock, Massachusetts. Regardless of who invented the radio, it quickly became a huge part of people's lives, even saving people during the Titanic, as I'll later explain. Guglielmo Marconi. Guglielmo Marconi was born in Italy on April 25, 1874. He was born into a wealthy family and received private education. He later went on to the Technical Institute of Leghorn to study his interest, physics, but left the school without any official qualifications. His mother introduced him to Professor Righi, a noted physicist, who acted as his advisor. With his guidance, Marconi focused his interest on the radio and radio waves. He began using Heinrich Hertz's previous work to conduct experiments of radio transmissions, but like Hertz, could only achieve them of close distances, a couple meters away. Marconi gradually increased the distance using coherers, a device which detects radio signals, and antennas. In 1912, when the Titanic struck the famous iceberg, radios by the Marconi Company had been installed inside the ship. These radios were the best at the time, and they were wireless, so they could transmit up to 400 miles away during the day and 2,000 miles away during the night. The night was clear on the 14th of April when the Titanic hit the iceberg, so the emergency messages sent could reach very far distances and other ships. However, the lines were so busy with transmissions being sent that the messages were unclear. Also, the exact location was unknown, so it was sent incorrectly to many receivers. Afterwards, hundreds of people and survivors were rescued by ships who had received the distress calls. Marconi can be thanked for these people surviving. Also, after this disaster, radios and wireless equipment were developed and new laws were passed to ensure they had an emergency alarm, and this change was led by Marconi. Reginald Fessenden. Reginald Fessenden was born in Quebec, Canada on October 6, 1866. Fessenden was strong in math, art, and language in younger grades at school, and he did lots of advanced work. He also conducted lots of experiments from a young age. He then went to Trinity College School and afterwards was offered a math scholarship to Bishop's College and a job there. At 18, Fessenden began working as a principal at a school in Bermuda, but he realized his true interest was wireless telegraphy when he saw an Alexander Graham Bell telephone demonstration. After a couple years of working in Bermuda, Reginald Fessenden went to New York to try and get a job with Thomas Edison to pursue his career in electricity. After calling for many weeks to try and get a job, he was finally given one. Fessenden was a very important man who created many inventions and developed many other people's as well. Fessenden developed and fixed Marconi's concept of sending messages through Morse code on the radio. On December 23, 1900, Fessenden made the first ever sound broadcast on radio, saying, 1, 2, 3, 4, is it snowing where you are, Mr. Thiessen? If it is, would you telegraph back to me? This was sent from Cobb Island, near Washington, to a mile away. 6 years later, after much more development, Reginald Fessenden sent the first live broadcast on the radio to the world. He sang O Holy Night and other Christmas carols with his wife and assistant because it was Christmas Eve, December 24, 1906. He also invented many other things, such as beepers, and after the Titanic, he invented a device called the fathometer, which was similar to current-day radars. They bounced signals off icebergs and were used to measure ocean depths. They were very useful in World War I for Allies detecting submarines. The reason the radio was created. The cause of the radio was mainly so people could communicate over large distances. Later, it began being used for other things, such as news and entertainment, but its reason for being invented was for communication for people such as captains on ships, because they had no other way to send messages to other boats or people on land. This creation was necessary for ships and was used for basic messages and emergency ones. The radio saved 800 lives just a few years after its invention in the famous example of the Titanic, because the workers were able to send radio transmissions to people on land and nearby Examples ships. Such as these are the reason the radio was created. The significance of the radio. The radio changed life in a way much more than we would imagine. Before the radio was invented, to contact someone we would have to write notes or see them in person. To receive news and information, we would have to see it firsthand or hear from others or wait for the newspaper. Having radios makes receiving news and messages faster, easier, and more efficient. Also, radio waves were created so that radios could work. Radio waves are used every day in radios, telephones, and TVs. Why the radio is more significant than the telephone. The radio was created around the same time as the telephone. However, radios have been important and used for a longer time, and they are used by more people. We have radios in our homes, cars, and even high-technology ones used anywhere, such as for singing performances. Telephones and mobile phones are also technically different things. Telephones must be connected to a landline and are connected to a telecommunications grid, whereas cell phones and smartphones use microwave telecommunications and can be used on a wireless network. Fewer and fewer people have telephones in their homes nowadays, showing how insignificant they are. Everyone just has mobile phones. If we are being technically correct, they are very different things. Finally, telephones wouldn't even exist if it wasn't for the creation of the radios, because this also created radio waves. Radio waves are used in both radios and telephones for them to function. Therefore, telephones wouldn't even exist if the radio didn't, and this makes the radio clearly more significant for the whole world. Significance to Canada. The radio is significant to the whole world, but it is especially useful and important for Canadians. Since the Canadian Reginald Fessenden created or partially created the radio, Canadians became better known worldwide. This invention put Canada on a world stage and showed everyone that Canadians can be famous inventors and brilliant people instead of irrelevant as most of the world saw Canadians at the time. Also, since Canada is such a huge country, communication and sharing of news and messages was extremely difficult without the existence of the radio. Once the radio was created, people from coast to coast could be informed in minutes of what was happening on the other side of the country. Radios brought Canadians closer together and made them and the whole world much safer. For example, in the late 1800s, if a natural disaster occurred, people would have no idea what was happening, whereas in the 1900s, this news could be immediately heard on the radio, which would warn many people to protect themselves, and this would save very many lives. Therefore, the radio is more significant than the telephone.